Well, I'm going to start introductions because that was sort of like a perfect musical entree into our panel. And I wanted to first off start by welcoming everyone. We'll have others join us and we'll let them join us as we go. I first want to just introduce who I am and my co-moderator, and then we'll do a brief welcome slide and we'll introduce the panelists one by one, and then we'll start in with our questions. So hi, my name is Jen Katz-Buonincontro, and I'm Associate Dean of Research in the School of Education. And we're excited to host this panel today. And I want to introduce my co-moderator, if you would.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monet Harbison. I'm a first-year PhD student, and I'm the president of the School of Education Genomes, GSA. I'm really excited to help moderate this today.
Awesome. Thank you. So what we're going to do is we have, let's see, Sinead is going to help moderate the chat. And so if people have questions as you're thinking, and if you're taking notes, feel free to drop a question in the chat. And then as we converse today, we'll open it up at a couple of different points and Sinead will collect some questions for us. So thank you, Sinead, for helping out with that. So first, just wanted to talk a little bit about the vision with the panel. So last year, we worked with the faculty to come up with core values around the area of research. And this year, what we're trying to do is to map our panel's research presentations and professional development opportunities kind of onto that. And we did a survey and we noticed that people are very interested in learning a little bit more about the writing process and the submission process. So the goal was really to think about how do we help ourselves develop our journal writing skills, both as students and early, mid, and late career researchers. And when we think about our journal manuscripts, how do we think a little bit more deliberately about different options and types of manuscripts that are out there, from empirical to literature reviews, conceptual, etc. And then for the third area is to really to think about how to leverage our expertise and our knowledge in-house in the School of Education and extend it out a little bit more. So what we're going to do today is we're going to stay on the Zoom for anyone who's interested in hearing about how we will start forming a writing affinity group. A couple of years ago, we did form a collaborative writing group, and then people formed little clusters based on that and sort of supporting each other in their writing goals. And so we want to think about that again because people expressed interest in, I think, especially just, working remotely a lot and working on Zoom. How do we support each other with our writing goals? And I think one of the nice things about the potential of a writing affinity group is to create accountability and even to do peer review. I think that's one of the goals of that, so that we can improve our manuscripts. So let's get right to it. What I'm going to ask the panelists to do is if they would kindly introduce themselves and then tell us what their editorial position is and what that role is within their journal. Tell us just a little bit about their journal. And let's see, why don't we start with Alonzo? We'll just go alphabetically. So good afternoon, Alonzo. Would you mind sharing?
No problem. I'm Dr. Alonzo Flowers. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education. I'm also the associate dean of DEI in the Graduate College. The journal that I'm a co-editor for is the Journal of African American Males in Education. I've been a journal editor for this particular journal for 2 years with my colleague Rob Palmer at Howard University. Prior to that, I was on the editorial board for about, oh my God, it's 8 years. And then prior to that, I was a copy editor as a student, as a PhD student. And so I've served on this board for about 12 years. And so the focus of the journal is really to capture the experiences of African-American and Black males as they navigate their educational trajectory, particularly looking at areas of STEM, identity formation, early ed, higher education, and the transition to work. And this is important because we're really a P20 focused journal. And so it's not fixated in one kind of siloed space in education. And so we get a variety of focuses and topics. And so it makes for rich discussion within the journal. And so again, if you're interested and you're right towards that population, please let me know. And we also have a sister journal. It's the Journal of African American Women in Education, and it's housed out of, I believe, Morehouse University. And again, their focus is very similar to ours, and they write towards the issue of African American or Black women in education.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you so much. Let's go on to Rajashi. Rajashi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Rajashi Ghosh. I'm an associate professor of human resource development and also department chair of policy organization leadership in School of Education. I'm currently the editor-in-chief of Human Resource Development International Journal. I became the editor-in-chief on September 1st of last year, 2021. But prior to that, I served in an associate editor position for that journal last 3 years. And before that, I was an associate editor for their perspective section. So our journal is a bit unique in the sense that it has two sections. One is focused on peer-reviewed articles, and the other section is focused on perspectives or opinion pieces. So I started my tenure on the editorial board as an associate editor for the perspective section. Then I transitioned into an associate editor for the peer-reviewed section, and currently I'm the editor-in-chief. So I kind of focus on the peer-reviewed articles, but I also collaborate with the perspectives editor for the articles we publish in the perspective section. In terms of the aims and scope of our journal, we are interested in any kind of workplace learning and development at different levels, individual, team, organizational level. And when I say workplace, I mean like really broadly in terms of any kinds of context where learning is happening while individuals are working. And so it doesn't need to be a certain kind of traditional organization in the sense of that context bound that it has to be either in higher education or K through 12 or beyond K through 12. It can encompass all those different kinds of contexts. And specifically, we're interested in cross-cultural aspects of workplace learning in kinds like comparative understanding of how human resource development happens in workplace context, different cultures, and what can we learn from those different national cultural contexts to really get a global understanding of supporting human resource development. We also publish articles focused on regional HRD, which has to do with capacity building in a particular region of the world in terms of how workforce development capacity is built by those particular nations and their governments. So it's the aims and scope is pretty broad, but one emphasis that we highlight to all our authors is to speak about the international implications. That doesn't mean that they have to collect data, cross-cultural data, but whichever data that they've collected in whichever country, they need to speak to the international implications of their findings from that data. So that's an area of emphasis. So I'm very excited to serve in this role. And I also want to give a shout out to Elaine here, who is my doctoral student, and she's helping as the social media editor for the journal, Human Resource Development International. And so, Elaine, I don't know if you want to say a bit about your role, but what she has really helped us to do is to increase our visibility in different social media outlets. So we tweet, we post like on LinkedIn in terms of any cutting edge piece that has come up or any kind of topic that we want to highlight, and Elaine helps us. So Elaine, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, we're still in school. We just finished class. Yeah, just as Dr. Ghosh said, just trying to increase visibility for the journal, and it's been so fantastic to be involved, and we meet monthly and just met this morning. So it's great to see like how the journals work and all the different editors. So I've been really enjoying it.
And one just last note, this journal is co-sponsored by Academy of Human Resource Development, which is a US-based organization. but it's, it has global outreach, but also co-sponsored by University Forum Human Resource Development, which is a UK-based organization. So again, it's unique collaborative sponsorship that encompasses the US and the UK for the job. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Toni, Dr. May, would you care to share a little introduction?
Sure. I'm an associate professor and I teach assessment research and statistics courses in the School of Education. So I've served in a couple capacities. Currently, I'm on the editorial board for Investigations in Mathematics Learning Journal. This means that I review a substantial number of manuscripts each year, and I provide feedback to the editors on the direction of the journal. So they might want to come out with new policy or modify the scope, and they will send that information to us on the editorial board to give feedback and help them with shaping the direction of this journal. Prior to this, I was an associate editor for School Science and Mathematics Journal for 8 years. In this capacity, I assigned reviewers to manuscripts. And once I got those reviews back, I would then be the one who made the decision as to whether the article was either accepted or rejected into the journal. So the kinds of manuscripts that both of these journals publish, they both say that they publish theoretical and empirical pieces. I have to say, in my role over the last 10 years or so, I've never seen a theoretical piece come my way or a conceptual piece come my way. And that's because I think I'm pretty much positioned into the research world. And so that's the type of article that I will see. I'm usually assigned work that is quantitative, mixed methods, or measurement pieces. I don't typically see a straight qualitative piece because that's not my wheelhouse. And so the editor is really good at sending, whether I was associate editor or in this new role, they're really good at sending me pieces that really fit with what I do, because then I have a good assessment of what I'm really looking at there.
Thank
Did
you.
I cover everything, Jen? There we go.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that explanation, because that was going to be part of one of my next questions. Let me turn it over to Kathleen, Dr. Provenzano, and I was just trying to find you on the Zoom. I'm like swimming through faces.
She lost internet connection.
Okay.
And so she's trying to get back on. So I don't know if she's back or not, but just wanted to let you know, if you don't see her, that's why.
Okay, great. We will get back to her. So my first question is, does your journal have a preference for quant, qual, conceptual, theoretical journals? And the reason I ask is because I'm an associate editor for the Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts. And it's only been quantitative as a psychological journal, but just now what's interesting is they're starting to let in some qualitative articles, a little bit of mixed methods. So I want to take the temperature for each of your journals. Alonzo and Raji, because I know Toni kind of spoke to that a little bit.
Yeah, JAAME allows for qual, quant, mixed methods, and conceptual pieces. But the most important piece that we're looking for, because we want to make that connection with practitioner experiences, is that we're looking for policy or practical recommendations. And so making sure we're making those connections back to the communities that we're serving. And so we do all the methodologies, but the one thing that we're really honing for, particularly when we're accepting publications, is making sure there's some level of practical or policy-centered recommendations.
Right. Yeah, that's great to know. I love that, because that's, I think, one of the things that really distinguishes the field of education from other social science fields is that there's a strong emphasis on implications for policy and practice. And so I think that's one of the areas that sometimes people can struggle with adding that on. It's not just the research piece. Let's see. So Raji, would you care to comment on the type of journal that you accept? Are you open to all?
Yes, at HRDI, we are open to conceptual and empirical, and that empirical would cover different kinds of research methodologies, ranging from quant, qual to mixed methods. In fact, one of the, and it's on our website under the aims and scope, one of the values we want to emphasize is diversity in research methodologies, and really encouraging different approaches to research. And so hence we encourage our authors to really kind of try different ways to study the topics or the research topics of their interest. And so we take pride in that. Yeah.
I want to get a little bit more into what you see from your view. When people are submitting manuscripts, so typically, because I know there's a lot of students on here. Oh, Kathleen, I see you're here. I'm glad you're able to make it again. We'll get to you in 1 second. Thanks for joining. So one of the things that students want to know is, let me just go over the review process. So typically when you submit a manuscript, the associate editor, the editor identifies the right reviewer, and then typically you get 2, sometimes even more, depending on the reviews, 2 reviewers to look at it. And then typically an assistant or associate editor will look at it, render a disposition themselves, or make a recommendation to the chief editor or the regular editor to render that disposition on behalf of that team. So it goes through a very lengthy process. And actually, let me pause there. And Kathleen, would you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
My name is Kathleen Provinzano. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education in the Educational Leadership and Policy programs. I am from 2013 until recently, I served as the editor for Pennsylvania Educational Leadership, which is an open access peer-reviewed journal at the state level. Pennsylvania Educational Leadership is published by the Pennsylvania branch of ASCD. So topics really address the interests and concerns of Pennsylvania educators at all level, spanning PK through higher education. And the journal accepts a wide variety of manuscripts, including but not limited to single study inquiries, qualitative, quantitative research, theoretical and conceptual pieces, some historical analyses, and action research and first-person narratives. In 2014, we started, because it is very practitioner-focused and concerned with the issues of practitioners, we did start a practitioner page that that highlights the voices and thoughts, opinions of educators from the field. So submissions for that particular part of the journal do not go through the peer review process. They work with the editor or associate editor, and include things like book reviews, policy reviews, critical reflections on current educational issues, and those kinds of things. So I commenced as editor in 2021 and now associate editor for the Handbook of Research, Policy, and Practice in School-University Partnerships through Cambridge University Press.
All right, thank you so much. My first question for you is about mistakes that people make when they're writing and they're submitting their manuscript. So there are numerous mistakes that the average person makes, myself included, anyone who submits something. But the reason I ask this question is because the publication process takes so much time, and it's sort of a big challenge, especially when you're going up for tenure, to get a manuscript through that cycle of peer review and possible publication. So the reason I ask this is, what kind of insight do you have and suggestions for that early career researcher or student who's submitting a manuscript? When you think of maybe the top 1 or 2 kind of errors or weaknesses when people are submitting that you see, what comes to your mind? I'm going to leave that open for anyone who wants to take a stab at it.
I think often what happens is early career faculty, they'll do a one and done. And so they'll submit one, wait for that, and then wait for reviewer feedback, and then go on to the next manuscript. And it has to be a continuous process. And so right after you submit the first one, you need to move to the second one. And you have to have a system of building out your manuscripts to where you know, one, what's the requirements at your institution. And so most places have a 2 a year, 3 a year kind of unheard rule. And so you want to make sure, again, you're planning that out. There's also issues typically when you have all your manuscripts come out in 1 year. So you have like 6 come out, and you're not pacing yourself. And so coming up with a writing plan that allows you to, one, submit and know when those reviews will come back is really important. That way, again, you can map out your process into your 3rd year review. And so, you know, again, by third year review, you should have about 6 to 8 publications in based on mapping out that process for yourself.
Excellent tip. Would anyone like to add to that?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Kathleen.
from a timing perspective, I think another piece is also to look for special issues, right, related to your particular field, because you get stuck, I mean, it can take, there's been times where I've waited for a year and a half, right, for a manuscript to go through the process of the revisions and getting accepted and then published. So it's very lengthy. But if you work, and focus on special issue journals, that can be helpful because they usually expedite that process. And I found that to be helpful in the past.
So I'm going to speak a little differently to this question and talk about on the other side. So on the editorial side, if you submit a journal to me, there are 2 big things that I can tell you, if I see them, you're going to get rejected. And one of them has to do with alignment issues. What I mean by that too is you need to make sure that the purpose of your study aligns directly with your research questions, and that aligns directly with your literature review, and that aligns directly with your analysis. When I read your research questions, I should know what your analysis is before I even look at the analysis section. And if you've written them clearly and properly, I can do that. However, a lot of early scholars fail to align everything very nicely and neatly. And when they don't do that, that is a very clear indication that they really don't exactly know what they're doing. And we will pick that apart. We will give you constructive feedback on how to fix it, but you're also going to get rejected and have to try again. Another thing that all of you can do is pay attention to details. And what I mean by that is you need to know your APA headers. You need to know what a table and figure title looks like. If I scroll through your reference section and find APA issues, if it's an APA citation journal, which mine all are, and I find little errors in your references, I then start to wonder about your attention to detail in general. If you can't give me a clean reference page, then how can I believe that you can actually give me clean literature reviews? So my one point to you is be particular on whatever the style is that your journal is, and make sure you don't get dinged for those things, because it starts to question the integrity of the rest of your study as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Toni, about the alignment piece and making sure to pay attention to details, because writing, particularly in the academy, is formulaic. And so I always tell my students, read the articles within that journal and see how, again, they've been accepted. And so you want to make sure that how you are writing is kind of similar to what's been presented in the journal currently. And so make sure, again, no matter what the methodological process is, make sure, again, that the writing that you're doing looks like what the journal is asking for. Because a lot of times what I see in our journal is students particularly will take their dissertation and submit pieces of it. And we can tell it's a piece of a dissertation and it's not written in the format of a journal. Dissertation writing and journal writing are 2 different pieces. And so it's really important to understand, again, the structure and format of those processes.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Oftentimes what I've seen is also students try to take their entire dissertation and publish without, I mean, they cut a bit, right? But not nearly enough for what needs to be a manuscript. So that alignment piece is important. And also reading through, because the journal is going to want you to cite pieces from their journal in your paper, right? Like I can tell you right now, urban education is always going to come back and say, can you please include more references? Even if you include references from urban education, they will always come back and say, include more references from urban education if possible. So I think that's really important.
I think, in a nutshell, I would add is that, have you done your homework in terms of really reading recent and prior publications in the journal that you're submitting to? Do you know, as my colleagues mentioned, the aims and scope of the journal to really argue the fit? And I cannot overemphasize the importance of this, notion of fit. You can use the most sophisticated research methodology and data analysis methods, but that's not going to really cut it unless you've argued for a theoretically important research gap, and then you've really argued for how your purpose aligns with the gap, you're identifying in terms of then, now that you've convinced the reader possibly about this is the gap and this is why it's significant, and this is how it's theoretically important to the field, and this is what I'm going to do to address the gap, and then really justify how the choice of your research paradigm design aligns with your articulation of the gap and the purpose statement. So that's what I think, as Dr. May also articulated, is that that's the alignment or the fit thing, which if is lacking, it definitely then pushes us to reject the paper. Of course, we provide constructive feedback. Even if it is a desk reject, we do provide constructive feedback. But a lot of times we see where the authors fall short is that it seems like it's their blind spot. Like they're already convinced about the importance of the study they're doing, right? So in their head, they feel that it's kind of obvious what the gap is, but it is not to the reader. Not every reader is as embedded and convinced about the problem you want to study. So therefore, one of my mentors had really said it well to me once. It's like, think of this, that the first 3 pages of your article, it's almost like you're making a case, but you're not in the room. So as a, if you were to make a case as a lawyer, you're arguing your case, but as when you write your journal article, you're making a case, but you're not in the room. And so when the editors and reviewers read that, you have to be as convincing for them to really go beyond those 3 pages. So it's kind of like the first 3 pages is the hook. And even if you've not convinced me about a theoretically important research gap and how you're aligning your purpose and research questions with that gap, and then how you're aligning your research design with the purpose and the research questions, you've lost me there. I'm not interested to go beyond that.
Excellent, thank you. I'm taking feverish notes because I want to be able to double check with you after the panel that I took these tips down correctly, and then I will send them around to the community too, because I'm a huge note taker and a believer about using the lessons learned from a panel. And so on that note, what are your tips for English language learners when they're submitting a manuscript? We get, like I know myself, we get a lot of manuscripts submitted from people who you can tell that English is not their first language. And I don't just mean like, oh, okay, this someone is not a native US, researcher, but what tips do you have if English is not your first language, and you're trying to publish in English?
I'm gonna make a response to this item that's not exactly just for people who are English language learners. I can say personally, I always send my manuscripts to other colleagues before I ever submit it, because even as a, with English as my primary first language, I have issues. I have grammatical errors. Even with Word and Grammarly, I still have problems. Sometimes my problem is not as clear as I would like it to be in my statement. So I always send it to other colleagues who are not on the manuscript and ask them to give me feedback. In the past, when working with other writing teams, we will actually pony up the money and send it to an actual editor, especially if we are trying to hit a flagship journal or a top tier journal in the field. We don't want to have any chances of having somebody think we don't write well by a typo or something. So those are the types of things that I personally do. And I would say for our students, whether you are an English language learner or not, we have a great writing center at Drexel. And before you send anything out, you should go and talk to them. You can always ask other people to review it and give you feedback. When we have seen manuscripts come in that are obviously from English language learners, we will go back to them and ask them to take it to an editor before it comes to us, to make sure that it's written in a manner that isn't going to be punitive when someone reviews it for content.
At HRDI as well, we encourage proofreading. What also we encourage our authors is to submit their articles first to a conference. And so in our professional field, Academy of Human Resource Development is our primary professional association, and they have annual conferences and they have workshops and sessions specifically targeted to develop authors for our journals and international authors. Like last year, 2 of our flagship journals, including HRDI and then HRDR, we collaborated to offer an international author development workshop where we specifically requested abbreviated versions of their papers to be submitted. And then we had expert scholars, senior scholars in the field who were mentors. And then they gave one-on-one feedback during the workshop. It was held virtually, of course, but they gave one-on-one feedback based on their review of the abbreviated papers, which was very helpful. But as Dr. May is saying, again, it's important to have a circle of either peers or trusted colleagues and mentors who you can tap to review your work. Never ever submit to a journal before having at least a pair of eyes look at your paper and give feedback to you, because it helps to kind of like progressively then improve, and then you are putting your best foot forward when you're actually hitting that submit button to a journal.
Yeah, like I said earlier, journal writing is a skill, and you don't develop it. You don't develop it in one shot. You develop it over time. And so, one, practice the skill, understand the contents of the journals you want to write for, and then develop a writing group and develop a writing team that's going to provide you feedback. And that writing team should include someone who's got accepted to a journal, and so they know the ins and outs of the process. Because again, in grad school, this is great that we're doing this, but I remember my grad school experience, we really didn't talk about publications. Like the idea that we would publish, but we never had conversations about what that looked like strategically. And so I think it's really important now that we're doing that and training the next generation of scholars to think about before they get out of grad school to develop these skills. That way they're not kind of figured out when they're going to their first faculty appointment. And then you're on the clock. Right now, as a student, you're not on any kind of clock. You can learn the skill and develop those skills in your own time and pace. But once you're in that job, you're held to expectations, and you got to make sure you meet those every year. And so it's really important as you kind of progress to your PhD program, particularly for the students, to kind of take the time to learn these skills. And again, like I said earlier, writing for your class paper is not the same as writing for a journal article for publication. And so it's really important, again, to know the distinct differences of the different type of writing that happens throughout the academic in the academy, but also what skills are necessary for you to develop to be successful in the process.
Yeah, I would say networking is essential. I think you'd be surprised with how many senior scholars would be willing to put their eyes on your paper or have a conversation with you around your paper as you conceptualize it, particularly if it's in relation to work that they have done. So you start building your network now, and that's only going to help you in the future as you kind of move out of grad school and into the profession. So I think that's super important, and take advantage of AERA has, there's a number of different SIGs that have writing groups that develop and have pre-conference meetings and writing groups. UCEA does that as well. So just getting involved in those experiences would be really helpful.
And to Kathleen's point, you got to remember, particularly for the students and even junior faculty, that publications are currency in our field. And so if you're asking a senior scholar or another scholar to participate or just review, make sure that you're paying it forward. Add them on as an author, provide them, like if they're contributing to the paper, make sure again that the expectations are clear of what their involvement is. Because again, I would hate to commit hours of my time to something outside of my research to help someone move forward, and they're not thinking about how to collaborate or build someone else's scholarship in that process.
Well, that kind of segues perfectly into our next question. Even before you get into submitting your manuscript for publication, what tips do you have for especially students and junior faculty about deciding author role and author placement on a manuscript?
Have the conversation at the forefront.
Is that pre or post tenure? After tenure, yeah, you can all have first author. But pre-tenure, I think it's really important to negotiate where you are in your trajectory. So again, if you're in your second year and you have no first authorships, then you have to have that conversation with your collaborative team. But if you're like post tenure, like myself and Dr. May and others who have tenure, most of the times I don't really care. So I think it really depends on your writing group and again, how important or how much work you're contributing to the process.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of the things that we do is while we're scripting out a paper, we sit down and we outline it, whoever I'm collaborating with, we outline the paper, talk about the sections, who's taking what, and then the conversation right after that is, okay, how do we want to proceed with authorship? And knowing that that's not set in stone, there might be something that changes, but for the most part, once you've kind of established those, that authorship and those boundaries, you stay within them.
Yeah, we actually did that this morning, right, Dr. Provenzano? We had a group of 4 of us, and that's what we did, was we outlined a paper and put names next to things and decided what's author authorship going to be. I also want to just point this out. We have rules for this. Look to the APA manual. The APA manual is very clear on what author authorship should look like, and it's all about contribution. So whoever's contributing the most should be lead author. It shouldn't have anything to do with, titles or anything like that. It really should fall to contribution if you look at the APA manual and what it tells us to do.
Yeah, for me also, I think, a couple of things that my colleagues already said, that conversation needs to happen on day one instead of waiting and kind of assuming that it's implicit. And that always kind of goes down a rabbit hole you don't want to go down. So have that conversation, make expectations explicit. It's all about contributions and a fair understanding of who is contributing, what extent, and then how does that help us decide the author order. One ground rule that I've always followed in my career is that you get authorship only if you write a portion of the manuscript. So, a lot of times individuals might have good comments that would be feedback, review, but unless they've written, to me, it doesn't account for authorship. So that to me is a ground rule that has worked for me, that you have to write a section, how much ever portion that might be, depending on to what extent you can contribute towards the development of the paper, but you have to be an author in the sense that you've written a part of the manuscript.
I think to try to get more into what the student experience, it could be really awkward if you're talking to your supervising professor or a faculty member about authorship position. So let's say you did contribute a lot. What are some ways that students can empower themselves in their authorship role when they are going to their supervising professor or to a faculty member when they're seeking to publish, because of the power differential?
I think it's a two-way process, right? So in my understanding, as faculty, as mentors, when we engage with any kind of collaboration with our students, it is also incumbent on us to make expectations clear and explicit upfront, and have that transparency in our interactions with the student in terms of how we see the student contributing and how we see our role in supporting the students' research agenda. So, in terms of then the students, at least again, reflecting on the experiences I've had advising doctoral students, when they have a particular area or focus in their research, then in terms of how they want to build their research agenda is one of the first conversations I have with them. So how is it that, what kind of impact do you want your work to have? And then how you're planning towards building a pipeline of work to make that impact. And then kind of supporting them to realize that vision. And so they would then come up with how can we, and you can start publishing even before you complete your dissertation. So let me be clear about that. In terms of when you're starting to do your literature review to really build your topic, you can think about submitting that as a conceptual paper or a literature review paper to a journal and get valuable feedback as you work along the way. And that can actually inform your dissertation. So that conversation needs to happen first, in the sense that, okay, so this is the trajectory that you see your work kind of taking, and then how you want to build that trajectory in terms of coming up with first author pieces that I, as your advisor, can of course co-author with you, but I want you to kind of take the lead on and kind of lead me with your vision of where you want to go, your work to go.
Yeah, I do something very similar when I first take on an advisee, particularly after they finish their comps and they start moving towards proposal development, is that I give them a little one pager that says, okay, these are expectations, and then we have a conversation what they look like. And one of the things in expectations is that upon completion of your dissertation, we will co-author one paper together. And it's kind of that, go back to that notion of currency of the process, right? And so in that process, I will help shape, develop, and kind of mentor the students to how to kind of write their dissertation paper into kind of a journal format. And that's, again, that's also time and effort and energy that you have to do to kind of show and mentor someone to do that. But I think having clear expectations from the get-go is really, really important. And then knowing, to Rashi's point, knowing what your end goals are. Not all students want to go to academy. And so not all students have to publish in academic journals. Some people want to publish in practitioner journals. And so having clear ideas and expectations of your directionality is really important also.
I just put a Word document in the chat. Quite a while ago, Dr. Provenzano and I were working with a pretty decent sized group of students who wanted to use our data for publications. And what we did at the very start, before we even talked about data that they could possibly use, was we wrote this summary of what authorship order would look like and why it could change and things like that. And we provided that to them, and we had an initial meeting where we went over this along with our work that was in progress, so they knew what they could or couldn't do and how they could possibly build on our work and available data to them. This was really helpful for us to make, and for our students, in really understanding what we were going to do and what this was going to look like. So I would say, how can you as students, have a voice for yourself with others? Do something like this. If you come at it from this is APA guidelines, I'd like to work with you, this is my thought, let's follow these and decide who's going to do what. It works out well.
Thank you all so much. Did you have a comment? I wasn't sure, Dr. Provenzano.
Oh, no, I mean, I think just to reiterate, I think having the conversation early is really important so that it avoids any kind of problem down the road.
Thank you so much. And our next question is, how do people find a good fit for their work? So how do they shop around for journals? As when you're first starting out as a student, you're looking at, you want to publish, you want to publish your work, you want to submit a manuscript, but how do you find the place where your work will most fit?
I think a big part of it is you want to take a look at where are those who are related to your research interests publishing themselves, right? So the work that you're reading and the work that you're reviewing, where is that getting published? Taking a look at, if there's a piece that really resonates with you, going to the reference page and taking a look at where a lot of those authors have published their work, and then just start the process from there. So you can start narrowing down particular journals that are of interest to you, and considering what type tier journal they are they, practitioner focused journals, scholarly journals, peer reviewed journals, right? So thinking about what your end goal is and what you want for that piece, and then also making sure that you are looking at pieces that have been published in those journals that relate to what you're interested in.
I think also is understanding the scope and purpose of your research trajectory. And so again, if you want to go into academy and what kind of institution you want to go to. So for example, a lot of the research ones are looking for their scholars to publish in X journals. Now, that process is not always clean cut. Perfect example, I'm in the field of higher education. I have never published in the journal of higher ed. It is not a space where my work situates itself. It's not a space where typically qualitative work that focuses on my populations is living. And so I had to navigate a career where I published in journals that were going to be impactful. And so it's important for you to write your own narrative. And you will do that as you go through your tenure process. But to write a narrative that supports why you decide to make the decisions you decided for where you publish. And so you have to be purposeful. And to be purposeful, you have to have an idea of what direction you're going. And so I knew that all the journals I wanted my work to be in is be in places where it's going to be, one, impactful, but also consumed by the people I wanted to be consumed by. So you can go into a top tier journal and no one ever kind of reads it because it sits there and it sits in isolation. But if it goes into the X journal where it has a higher viewership of the type of work that you're looking to do, then your work's gonna be more impactful and it's in the scope. And so those are things that you have to kind of navigate, and you learn that through mentorship and interacting with colleagues and other co-writers. And so it's not something that you're trained to do. It's something that kind of have to develop over time as you kind of work your way through the academy.
Yeah, I would emphasize mentorship for this one to really get a sense of your field and the reach of the work in your field and beyond. So for example, I would say that I am situated within the human resource development field, but I see my work to be relevant to learning and development in the field of management as well. So recently I published a duethnography paper in Management Learning Journal, which is an Academy of Management sponsored journal. But it is relevant to my work because it focuses on different kinds of adult learning, and my paper was specifically on transformative learning. And so I would really encourage you to have a broader, open kind of mind in terms of when you're trying to select the outlet. And as Dr. Flowers mentioned, it really comes down to impact and who is it that you want to impact. And then think about what kind of reach and do the journals that you're considering have. And there, you know, conversations with mentors in your field can really expand your view in terms of which journals you want to target, whether they have not just, you know, whether they reach not just the academics, but also the practitioners, because that's one of the struggles we have, the academia and practice divide. And a lot of us want to do work, scholarship that also informs practice. And so that's some of the things that we also kind of look out for when we are choosing a journal to send our work to.
So I agree with absolutely everything that was said. And I have one more point that I'd like to add on to that. Reach out to the editors. I do this all the time. We email the editors and we say, we're working on this piece. We think it would fit your journal for these reasons. What do you think? And we have been told time after time, we will not take a validation study, because that's a lot of the work that I do. And we say, okay, we'll move on to the next place. But we're not going to send a piece that is not even going to get a shot, because it can take you a couple weeks even to get a desk reject, depending on how backed up they are. And we don't want to waste that time. So I will shop around by talking to editors, and you'll be surprised, they will respond back to you. And they're usually pretty quick about responding back. And they'll tell you, you know what, I've even had them say, we're not going to be a good fit for that, but you should try this journal or that journal. And they will often give you suggestions on where to take it. So reaching out is a really good thing to do. Also, one other thing, if you have time, aim high. If you don't make it, you will get some great feedback, and then you take a step down and go to somewhere else. And it all depends on your time, though. I mean, if you are in a rush, you may not want to aim high and wait for that. But
yeah, I think part two of this conversation is like how to publish, where to publish. If you think about going to the academy, part two would be how do you then write a narrative that supports where you publish and how you publish. And so this is not a one-step process, particularly if you're going to go into the academy. You have to, again, have a trajectory that you support through your narrative moving forward.
You know, a best way to, again, say it in a nutshell is reject is a revise and resubmit for another journal. So as Dr. May was saying, is that focus on the review feedback. And this is, you know, again, something very important to understand is that rejection is, yes, of course, like, you know, if you had wanted to really publish in that journal, it would feel like a setback. But if you focus on the feedback, and what I do is that when I say, and all of us get rejections, by the way, depending, like, doesn't matter which stage of our careers we are in. So let's just kind of like admit that up front. But it is how you deal with the rejection makes a lot of difference. So when you do get feedback, which seems harsh, and at first go it might, try to look at it, but distance yourself. Like, do not react, or, you know, try to stop yourself from reacting. And so distance yourself from that feedback for a week, and then come back to it. And come back to it and really kind of objectively read through the feedback to see how what the reviewers have said might have been in your blind spot, and therefore you missed it. And that helps a lot to substantially improve your work. And I would even go to the extent to say that you might even aim higher the second time. If you really take note of the feedback and address the feedback, your paper might actually be substantially better, that you can target a higher impact journal in the second go. So really understanding the reviewer comment, and if it's a revise and resubmit, if it's not a reject, if it's revise and resubmit, understand that as editors, we really look for how you're responding to the reviewer comments. So it's like a conversation with the reviewer. So you're expected to give a table, right? Response to reviewer comments. So in that, I really, when I'm as an editor looking through your revised submission, what I'm really seeing is that your sincere effort to address a reviewer comment. And there was a question, I think, earlier by Dr. Folletta, that what if there's a disagreement between the author and the reviewer in terms of that a reviewer has asked to do something that the author is saying, no, that will fundamentally change our paper, and hence we are not willing to do that. If such a situation occurs, as an editorial team, we invite others. So we have associate editors on our team, right? So we invite others to pitch in and we have a conversation about it. So it might be at times the case that a reviewer has a point, but the author is has sincerely thought through. So do not just kind of dismiss the point as an author. Think about it and give us a rationale. For us to make an independent decision, give us a rationale that this is what the reviewer is wanting, but this is why we cannot do this, because it fundamentally changes what you're wanting to do in this article. And so that gives us the ammunition as an editorial team to really go back to the reviewer to say that, okay, this is what the authors thought about it, and this is why they cannot do this. And then the discretion, the ultimate decision lies with the editorial team and the editor, right? So if I believe in the potential of your paper, I can go over what the reviewer has said, but of course, in a respectful way, and explain to the reviewer, but you need to give me that rationale. If you just say that, oh, I don't want to address this because I feel it's not a good enough comment, or I feel I don't agree with it, that is not sufficient. That is not enough. And that sounds dismissive. So engage with the reviewer comments and really think deeply in terms of how the comments could be applied to improve your paper.
Yeah,
I wanted to add one
process. Sorry, Jeff.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just going to add in a super quick thing. I like what Raji was saying, that it is okay not to, like, if you get to revise and resubmit, it is okay not to agree or make every exact revision that both reviewers are requiring you to make. Like Raji is saying, that you can provide a rationale for why you might make a different decision. But I will make a suggestion, is just to hold yourself always very professionally and respectfully, because sometimes what you see is either an author being very, very defensive, or you could see a reviewer being extremely harsh and critical. So it can be on both sides. Like, because the thing is, you don't unless you're publishing in Frontiers, and Frontiers does a really interesting thing where you get to see who reviews your article, but otherwise it's blind. So you don't know who's reviewing your manuscript, sorry, not article. And so, but they know who you are, and they know your name, and you know your university and who your co-authors are. And so you're actually establishing your professional sort of persona through this process of the review process, because they might see you then at a conference, or they might see you make another separate submission. And so just always hold yourself in that place where you're just operating out of, not out of defense, but being professional, because it is likely you will encounter that person again, either in person or on Zoom, or through this process.
I just want to, so the editors know who the writers are, but your reviewers don't know who you are if it's a double blind process. And so, as a reviewer for journals, I never know whose paper I'm reading. I mean, sometimes I do, because it's the same body of work I've read forever and I know who it is, but it's not, but that's why you have to that's why you blind yours with author, if you're citing yourself and things. So just a point about that. And
that's an important point, because you kind of have to develop thick skin. It's not personal. They don't know you from anyone else. And so you got to develop a thick skin that this criticism is only to improve what you submitted. And also, just an anecdotal example is that journal publishing is not perfect. It's not a perfect process. And so an example of that is, like, I've been working on the piece with one of my co-authors for about 8 months in the Journal of Latino and Higher Education. And we resubmitted, the revisers submitted 3 times. And what they did, they gave the manuscript to different reviewers. And so we had 3 different perspectives of the journal. And it's like a never-ending process.
Well, Alonzo seems to be frozen. I just want to say, I've had the exact same situation, and I actually got so frustrated. It was an accept with revisions, and I've had the exact same thing. I pulled it because I just that you keep changing the target, and you can't ever meet a target that keeps changing when I've had to revise it 3 times now with different reviewers every time. So that's a very frustrating situation to go through when journals do it that way. It's tough.
Also, as editors, I think we need to invest, and we do make efforts to invest in reviewer development, right? So to your point, Dr. Katz-Buonincontro, that professionalism, that constructivist kind of attitude towards reviewing, where reviewing is not an act of fault finding. Reviewing, at least in my experience, I have tried to encourage, and I have tried to follow it myself, is that it's an act of learning, in the sense that you get to read work on topics that are relevant to your work. And so when you're signing up as a reviewer, you need to inculcate and practice this sense of humility, where yes, you want to be critical of the work, but you don't want to be dismissive. You don't want to be disrespectful of the work, because a lot of times when you think about reviewing as an act of fault, like it's almost like some reviewers approach with this default mindset that I'm going to reject the manuscript. Now I'm going to find reasons why I want to reject the manuscript. And that's not the right way to do it. In the chat, I'll put a citation of a paper which I'd written on the act of reviewing, because if you think of it as an act of learning, it automatically changes. It's a paradigm shift on the mindset that you apply when you're going through someone else's work, that you're genuinely interested to not just give feedback, but also learn from what is it that they're proposing. So it then, and through subsequent rounds of review, it then becomes a conversation, right? Yes, it is blind peer reviewed. And so I don't know the author as a reviewer, the author doesn't know me as who is the reviewer, but when I get the second round of revision, I see their response to review comments. So then it's like a anonymous conversation. But it's very important to be professional as a reviewer and be constructive as you give the review.
And I think that's helpful for individuals who want to go and review, because I know when I was serving as editor, I wouldn't allow obviously the criticism, constructive criticism is important. Providing different points of view and perspective is important. But if something came across that was crass or highly negative, I wouldn't forward that to, I would find a different reviewer, and oftentimes have to have a conversation with those individuals who are doing those types of reviews about the point of reviewing and what that looks like. So knowing at the forefront before you get engaged in that process what it should look like, I think is really important, because you also don't want to get on the bad side of editors who are looking at the way in which you're reviewing manuscripts.
And I was going to say the same thing. In my role as editor, I have absolutely hidden reviews from from people who have submitted. That review is still in my system. And as an editor, in the journal that I was in, we had the ability to rate our reviewers. So we would give them rankings on different qualities. Did they get it in on time? Was it quality feedback? Things like that. And then our reviewers had a score next to them. So that helped us to pick our reviewers that we wanted to review. But yes, I absolutely wouldn't let a negative review like that go out to someone who submitted an article. I'd find someone else to review it instead.
Well, thank you all so much. These were great answers. We have 2 questions that we weren't able to get through in the conversation, and I wanted to get those in really quick before the seminar ends. We had a question from Dr. Lee saying, I've seen calls from journals to submit proposals for special issue. Do you have advice for how to construct a solid proposal for a project like this?
If I may quickly jump in, my first suggestion for if you're considering doing a special issue proposal would be to first start with a focus session at a conference and generate interest on that topic. And then collectively, kind of like once you've done that focus session at a conference, collectively think of the different angles you want to argue for the need of that special issue. Because when, I've seen kind of authors like do that without having done that groundwork, what they often face is there's a lack of interest in terms of then that proposal receiving submissions from potential authors. So it's always kind of helpful to do that groundwork of doing a focus session on that topic in a conference in the field, and then follow it up with then writing a special issue for a target journal.
I'm sorry, I lost power. I have all my kids in the house on all electronics. So I think that's a great advice. I think also getting a commitment from authors that you think will contribute to the special edition is really important. And so maybe through that conference proceeding or that process, getting commitments from people who are interested in writing towards that special edition is really important. That's what we require as part of our submission.
Thank you. Any other answers before we move on to the next question? So Sinead asked, do you have a pile of papers just waiting for publication? I found that calls for proposals and calls for articles and papers often have very short turnaround time by the time I see them, i.e. I don't have enough time to write and submit a high quality paper. How do you handle that?
We are in the process of writing for a call right now, and it's a pretty short turnaround, but as I said, it's we. So Sinead, my answer to you is if you're going to try and go at this all alone, you're going to have a hard time with any of it. So I work on different research teams, and when we see something comes out that fits us, we get together and it's go time. We kind of drop our other things and we focus on that, but we all get together, it's all hands on deck, and we make it happen. But it's not just me doing it. And that's why we can hit a short turnaround like we'll do. Also, we'll reach out to an editor, like I said, because we did in this case too. We reached out and said, are you interested in this? We get them to say, yes, they are. And then we really focus on it and we just make it happen. So no, we're not sitting on papers ready to go. Anytime we have a paper, it's out there under review somewhere. So this is, okay, let's see if we can do this one now.
Yeah, I would build off of that. I mean, you need a writing team, you need a network, you need a collaborating group. You're going to have to do that if you want to get the numbers out there that your position or requires of you. I mean, the only way to really do it is in a collaborative setting. So, and sharing, just making sure as things come in, you're sharing them with your network and your network is sharing them with you, and having those open conversations about it to keep an eye out and work together. And you prioritize, okay, if this is a special edition and we need to get something put together, all of these other things kind of have to go on the back burner and we'll get this done.
Yeah, and your writing team is really important because it can't be about your own individualized self-interest. And so you really have to think about what's the commonality between y'all's research focuses, and then everyone contributes to that. And so maybe I'm writing this month about Latino males in engineering, and next month my team is writing about African-American males. And so everyone's interest is being supported through the process. And so you're not only building up your publication record, you're also building up your colleagues. And so it has to be a community-based thing. If you're writing in isolation, you're not going to do as well as others who are writing in teams.
Research is a social process, and it depends a lot on relationship building. So as soon as you can build a network of trusted co-authors, because co-authorship is kind of relationship that you really need to enjoy, because you, as Dr. Flowers said, you're kind of developing each other as you're working together. And so that investment needs to happen upfront for you to then succeed later, right? So that investment into relationship building with co-authors and really finding good co-authors to include in your network is an upfront investment that's going to give returns in terms of your publications later.
Thank you so much.
I think that last question is an important question. It's really it's focusing on what you want your scholarly identity to be. There's people in my field who publish like crazy, right? They're publishing 6 or 7 manuscripts a year, which is great, but there's not a balance. And so you have to think about, again, what do you want your scholarly identity to be? But also, what do you want your life to be? And so it's a balancing act. And some people have families or other obligations. And so to publish that much per year, you really have to have a real strong collective team, or you have to, again, do nothing else. And so we know in the role of being a professor, there's other obligations in that. And so you have, it's really individualized of what that looks like, but every institution will have kind of a minimal standard as you navigate your tenure process or promotion process. And one of the things I did in my career, I got advice from my mentor was that no matter what institution I was at, right like I was at a research one. And so my first institution, I wasn't at a research one, but I made sure I published like I was at Texas A&M. And so I made sure to publish 3 to 4 a year. That way my currency was marketable if I ever chose to leave. And so you got to determine, again, what's the best pathway for your career interests.
All right, Monet, is it a wrap? Do we have any other questions?
No more questions. It's a wrap.
It's a wrap. So what I want to do is pause because we know we're a little bit over time and take the opportunity to thank all the panelists because they basically volunteered and donated their time to share their insights. And this is like really fun and interesting conversation. You have a lot of kudos in the chat. And it's really exciting to see a lot of students here too, because that means they're investing in themselves and their potential as a scholar. And thank you to all the faculty for joining us. And it's very inspirational to have everyone together. I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to stay on the Zoom for anyone who's interested in hearing about the design of a writing affinity group. So if you want, just stay on, and it's not a commitment because I know some people were really nervous that they don't have enough time. We're just going to talk about what the vision of that might look at. So I'll stop the recording. Thank you and applause, 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 applause.